there we go. Excellent. Thank you. You've done such a good job with the introduction. I don't need to talk. I can skip my first three slides, I think. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and then straight to the PowerPoint. Can you see something that's green and blue?
Yes.
Great. Excellent. Okay, I'm just going to minimize this window so I'm not going to see your faces. That means I can't see your reactions, but it just has to be this way for now. So that's okay. All right. So I'm Katja. I actually have a PhD in social psychology, but in my PhD, I co-founded Prolific. And in today's talk, I'm going to talk about career opportunities after your PhD and what I've learned while doing a PhD myself and also founding and running a startup during my PhD. So thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to speak to you today, and I hope it's going to be useful for you. Oh, it doesn't let me progress. Bear with me. I hope the recording is going correctly. Okay. There we go. Yay, great, cool. So that's me. I'm gonna just spend a minute just talking about where I'm from and who I am. So I was born in Russia. And when I was 6 years old, my family and I immigrated into Germany. So we're Russlanddeutsche, as you call it in German. So basically people who have both Russian and German roots. And I did my bachelor's studies at Jacobs University in Bremen. And I grew up near Bremen myself. And then after my bachelor's, I did a gap year and I did an internship at a startup company. And I spent 6 months as an intern in human resources at a big corporate. And then after that, I basically did my master's in England. And right after my master's, I did my PhD. And during the PhD, I co-founded Prolific. So that's kind of my CV in a few sentences. And then I have a co-founder called Phelim. We met during our master's studies at Cambridge. And then 2 years later, we co-founded Prolific together. He's my technical co-founder. So he's the person who built the website and who was in charge for a long time of all the technical aspects of the product. Okay, why did we start Prolific? How did we get the idea? Why did we think, was this necessary at all? There were many moments in spring 2014 where basically I needed to recruit participants for my own PhD research. And at some point we were sitting in a Starbucks at the University of Sheffield, and I kept asking, where shall I get British participants from? Where should I find them? I was aware of Mechanical Turk, but it didn't have, it only had American and Indian participants, but it didn't have any European participants, for example, or other international participants. And I was really surprised at the time, thinking, is there really no international equivalent to Mechanical Turk? Mechanical Turk is the platform that pioneered online data collection, on-demand, affordable data collection. But at that point in time, there was not really any equivalent to mTurk. So we thought, how amazing would it be if we build our own website that can do what mTurk does, but offers more countries, more different participants. And so that's basically what we did. MVP stands for minimum viable product. It's basically the first version of your website or your product that you're building, the minimum viable version of your product. And how we built it was, we started just with the basic, kind of ingredients. We had a lot of science expertise. I knew all the target customers, which is behavioral scientists, basically in academia. And we were both quite passionate about the topic. Combine it with a course on Udacity, which Phelim took to improve his software engineering and web development skills, and then read a couple of books, and voila, you have it, the first version of Prolific, which we called Prolific Academic. And the idea was that it would make academics more prolific, which means more productive. The total cost for this was basically investing our time and less than 50 British pounds. But the investment wasn't huge. I think it's that we were very passionate and motivated that we pulled it off together. And then only 4 months later, from April to August 2014, we already had 10 researchers using the website and paying for it, for the service, from 9 universities who had already completed 16 studies. I added some screenshots here of how the original version of the platform looked like. Basically, you enter your survey URL, you say, this is how much time it's going to take, this is how much I want to pay each participant, and that's basically the most important information. And then you launch your study, and then you could even see the progress bar moving and the study getting completed. I was particularly proud of that back in the day because it was just 2 of us doing it. He was also just a PhD student, right? It was just 2 people. And here's the first big takeaway from this presentation, which is eat your own dog food. If you decide to go down the startup route, if you do want to start your own startup in your own company, then you have to use the product yourself. You have to be solving some real problem, some real pain point, and you have to be a customer, a user of your own product, right? That's really important because that way you can improve it much faster than if you never used your own product. Okay, fast forward 5 years, in spring 2019, we just had finished our PhDs and decided to go full-time with Prolific. I think we were around 10 people at the time. We were always big fans of Y Combinator, which is one of the world's best, you can call it startup universities or startup programs. They basically teach you how to build and scale a startup company. And they also invest into your startup company. So in our case, they invested $150,000. And we spent 4 months in Silicon Valley, in the Bay Area, in California, and took part in a summer program. And then the program culminates such that you go on a stage and pitch to investors and try to convince them to invest into your company. So I did all of that, and it was nerve-wracking, but it worked out. So I raised over $1 million from venture capital investors by the end of 2019. And it came with some press, TechCrunch article, and there was a nice interview with Forbes, where I spoke about sort of what Prolific does to provide trustworthy research and help researchers conduct trustworthy, high-quality research. For those people who maybe have never used Prolific, just a couple quick words about how it actually works. So it hasn't actually changed much. The core product is still the same. So you integrate with your favorite survey tool, you target specifically the participants you need. I think these days, so on the participant side, we're available in OECD countries, which is pretty much all Western countries, and then some other ones like Chile, for example, in theory, right, you can access, but then it depends on your specific criteria. So I'm not gonna get into too much detail here. And then you can just go ahead and start collecting data in real time. And the beauty is you can even follow up with participants longitudinally over time. And if you use strong experimental software like Gorilla.sc, the Gorilla Experiment Builder, you can even successfully run things like reaction time studies online. So I think the combination of Gorilla and Prolific is really powerful. I would recommend that you check out Gorilla if you have never heard of it before. I want to highlight that trust and data quality are really important uh, for research in general, but also for our own product and platform. And there's just one thing I want to give a special highlight to. We just published a paper last year on data quality of platforms and panels for online behavioral research. I'm especially proud of this paper because we basically asked the question, how do you define data quality? What does it mean to have good data or great data, right? And that's a really non-trivial question. And so I'm not going to bore you with the details because you can just read the paper yourself. But fundamentally, what emerged was 4 different dimensions, and it's focused on the individual level participant behavior, right? So whether participants comprehend the study instructions, whether they carefully answer questions and pay attention, whether they're honest or dishonest, and whether the results are reliable. For example, things like internal reliability. You will know that from your PhD research. Things like Chromebus Alpha, for example. And the good part about this is that it's possible to combine doing a startup and doing academic work. I'm sort of an example for that, right? So I do work in my startup, right? But simultaneously, I do academic work. I'm still very passionate about doing research and publishing papers. So I do seek out collaborations in whatever time I have available, and it can result in really fruitful outputs like this paper, for example. And our second author and long-term advisor, David, he's, for instance, an economist at Microsoft Research in New York City. And I believe he's getting paid just for literally doing research, publishing papers, going to conferences. That's his day job. So he's basically like an industry academic, if that makes sense, right? So there are definitely job opportunities where you can combine your academic passion with being in industry at the same time. And in fact, I've seen quite a few papers coming out of companies like Google and DeepMind, which is owned by Google, and other types of major technology companies that employ academics as sort of industry scientists. So I find that very uplifting that that's possible. Okay, keeping an eye on time. Some quick words on what we're doing with Prolific, what's the mission and vision. We're on a mission to empower great research. That's it. It's really quite straightforward. To accomplish that, we want to build the most trusted platform for research on the internet. And ultimately, the goal for us as a team is to enable scientists and businesses and governments to make better decisions, more evidence-based decisions. So that's that. Let's switch gears to some other very interesting questions around career opportunities after your PhD, or during your PhD, actually. So doing a PhD and running a startup is extremely hard. I'm sure you all agree. It's basically like 2 full-time jobs. However, deciding what to dedicate your career to is even harder. The question of what should I spend the next 30 or 40 years of my life doing? That's a hard question. And it doesn't mean that you have to have an answer that is so long-term, right? You can always adjust, you can change your mind, you can try out new opportunities, or you can, have your fingers in various things and then decide what you want to do. But that's a big question, and it's worth reflecting on strategically. People with PhDs have a lot of options. It's very good to have a PhD, I think. So the traditional path is to go for academia. That's the tenure track path, or maybe not even tenure track, but some kind of position in academia. You could go into industry and the opportunities are endless in industry. You could be an analyst, data scientist, user researcher, market researcher, consultant. There are countless opportunities. You can go into something that's closer to the government and maybe civil service as an advisor or researcher. You can even go the nonprofit path, work for a charity or NGO. You can do something that's a bit more independent as a writer. Maybe, you want to become a journalist or author. And I definitely know people who are going down this path and they're quite happy, but it requires a lot of sort of, right, strength and passion to carve out a very unique individual path. And finally, you can, of course, also found your own company or startup during or after your PhD. I really want to highlight that everybody is unique and no journey is the same. So my advice is first and foremost to always focus on your strengths and your passions. I don't think you can go wrong if you focus on what you're passionate about. And of course, all of you will have lots of transferable skills. So, for example, to start with, all of us will have a lot of intellectual and epistemic curiosity and an ability to learn fast, right? That's really, really important. And I think that's probably the number one skill out of all of the skills that I'm going to talk about in a second. As long as you keep your curiosity, you will automatically go down a healthy path, I think, because it will lead you to new areas, you will learn and improve, and then you will acquire skills and competencies just naturally. And I think you will instinctively seek out areas that you're good at, but also that are perhaps very important for whatever area you want to focus on. Scientific rigor, I think, is becoming more and more important these days. And that's true not just for academia, that's true for industry too. For example, in market research, you cannot get away with crappy data. You need strong, high quality data. And the lucky part or the good news is that in academia, we all get trained to be very rigorous. And with the open science movement as well, in the past, I'd say 10 years, I think it properly kicked off in around 2011. That movement is very clear. And if you are rigorous in your approach, that's definitely a winning point for you, regardless of where you go, right? And regardless of what you decide to do with your career. Okay, and then collaboration and team skills. I think that's an interesting one because that's not something that academia offers naturally. I think often, at least in my experience, people in academia work independently and individually, unless you deliberately seek out collaboration, or unless you have a PI or advisor who's very well networked and connected, then you're naturally kind of getting the collaboration. But I've seen in a lot of cases, PhD students just working on their own and being too shy to reach out to people as potential collaborators. I would recommend to definitely just reach out. It can lead to lifelong connections for you. So there's no reason to be afraid. You can just reach out, and anywhere in the world. I reached out to someone in America, Patrick Forscher, and we're friends until today, just because I wrote one email. So yeah, I would definitely recommend to collaborate as much as you can. And the ability to communicate complex ideas is actually also a really important transferable skill. Good communication is really hard. And I think that as part of academia and as part of going to conferences, we are taught how to communicate well because we get constant feedback. Also from journals, when we submit and publish articles, we get so much feedback for written communication. So I think that that skill is really valuable as well, regardless of what you decide to do with your career. And again, I want to highlight this point because it's so important. Everyone has their own unique journey, right? So focus on yourself and your skills, and then try to decide what suits you, what suits your skills, and what are you most excited about. Oh, and briefly, a footnote here on the idea of compounding yourself. So there's this really fantastic essay by somebody called Sam Altman, who was running Y Combinator for quite a while. He was, I think, CEO or president of Y Combinator. And so he wrote an essay on the topic of how to be successful. It's really, really good. And he talks about this idea of creating a virtuous loop in yourself that helps you to learn fast. So it's a bit like, instead of having a linear career trajectory, you need to ask yourself, how can you have an exponential career trajectory where you keep improving your skills in a way that it becomes compounding growth, kind of exponential growth. I would definitely recommend that you check out that essay. It really influenced me and sort of helped me think about my own career and what I want from life. So that's that. Okay, what to expect after your PhD? I'm not going to lie, it's very competitive. So I would recommend that you choose your future workplace, your work focus, and the people you work with really wisely. And trust your heart as well. If something doesn't feel right, if you have, let's say, an interview for a postdoc and something is off and it doesn't feel quite right, trust your instinct as well. Because academia is quite a, dog-eat-dog world. In German, we say Ellenbogengesellschaft, where, it can be very tough. And if you end up with people who maybe have very unhealthy work expectations for you, let's say your PI expects a lot of things from you, it can lead to all sorts of problems, burnout and mental health problems. So definitely choose wisely where you're going next, what place of work and what people you're going to work with. It can also be quite disillusioning towards the end of the PhD. I personally had a bit of a crisis because I felt that so much research is not replicable. I did not know towards the end of my PhD what papers I can trust and which I cannot trust. And I felt that, if I'm completely honest with you, I felt that I was wasting my time. I wasn't proud of my research and I felt very disillusioned at the time. And how do I deal with disillusionment? That's a really hard question. Oh, I don't know. I think I would say it's probably around just keep your faith and optimism and don't let anyone dim your light. You can still enjoy the work you're doing and you can still build a community of like-minded people or even diverse people around your areas of interest and still have the time of your life, right? I still went to conferences. I still met a lot of amazing people. Some of them are friends today. So don't let anyone dim your light. There might be a stretch during a PhD where you feel down and unhappy, maybe even depressed, right? But I want to reassure you that that's to some extent normal and everyone can go through this. And it doesn't mean that you're bad or that you're not good enough. I think that's really important to say. There's no way you would be where you are today if you were not good enough. That makes sense. So just have some faith that you'll figure everything out eventually. If you're interested in some kind of podcasts around science and academia, those would be my 4 recommended ones. And some of you might have heard about the reproducibility movement, started actually by 2 friends of mine, Amy Orban and Sophia Cruvel. That's also really great resource for things like, if you're interested in that, open science movement. What were some of my biggest challenges so far? So taking care of my mental and physical health. That was really tough before my PhD, during my PhD, even after the PhD, it's still very difficult. So how do I deal with this problem? Well, I make conscious time for my private life, reading books, going hiking, listening to music, and I make sure that I get support when I need it from family, from friends, or other types of, emotional or social support. One thing I struggled a lot with was isolation. I mentioned this earlier a little bit, right? Connecting with the right people is actually quite helpful. So I basically approached this by very actively asking for support and guidance, by reaching out to people. And often this would be strangers, people I've never met in my life. I would just write some emails, and let's say half of them or 33% of them respond to my emails. And suddenly there are some new connections. So I would definitely recommend just to be brave and reach out. And I also applied for a lot of different things in my life. I've been rejected from many things, but I've also been accepted to some things. So I did an internship at Columbia University during my undergraduate. I was a visiting researcher in California, and then the Y Combinator startup program. And these things happened simply because I asked. So I remember asking the professor during my bachelor studies, can you recommend any places to do an internship? And he said, oh, I have two options for you. I have a collaborator in Münster in Germany, and I have a collaborator in New York City. And I said, okay, New York City sounds great. And then he sent me there basically for 2 months for summer, it was summer 2010. And the reason this happened is simply because I asked. So don't be shy. Just ask people for tips and recommendations. And okay, another big challenge for me has been just making some hard decisions. For example, in the context of Prolific, we have to make a lot of decisions about what products should we build. Fundamentally, we offer data collection, but should we build anything on top of it? Let's say an analytics layer or analytics kind of platform on top of it. Do we do it or not? It's a really difficult strategic decision, and it would require a lot of resources to make it happen. And the way I approach decision making fundamentally is to ask whether the decisions are high versus low impact and whether they're reversible or irreversible. So, right, it's basically like a matrix. It's like 2 dimensions. And if the decisions are, let's say, high impact and easily reversible, then let's just go for it. But high impact in this case, I mean high positive impact, of course, right? So if something has potentially high positive impact, but is easily reversible, great. Because if it's not a good idea, we can just reverse it, not a problem. If it's high impact and irreversible, then I would definitely first have a really deep discussion with the team or with investors who give us a lot of strategic advice, and then decide what to do. But I wouldn't make a decision like that easily. And so you can just continue the thought experiment, right? For any decision you have in your life, what's the impact, and is it reversible or not? Or to what extent is it reversible? And definitely make sure to bounce your ideas off of other people in your network. But ultimately, I would say trust your gut feeling. You can't make all decisions based on numbers and calculations. Sometimes you just have to call the shot, as they like to say. So those are some of the things I found really hard. And just 2 more things on that. Keeping morale high when external shocks happen. COVID was extremely difficult for the whole world and continues to be. The war in Ukraine, as an example, is really, there's no words for it, right? That there's a war in Europe now. My advice on that would be to stay positive, get active or even activist in order to tackle feelings of helplessness, which I sometimes really struggle with. You know, there's a war and I feel like there's nothing that I can do. nothing really substantive I can do to help. And so what helps me is to sort of get active, right? Maybe a little bit of social media activism on Twitter or God knows, right? To sort of, I guess, also lift myself up personally. Okay, and then a promotion focus. I don't know how many of you have heard of this idea of prevention focus and promotion focus. It's basically, it's a psychological framework that talks about, are you focused on preventing losses or achieving gains? And it helps me a lot to adopt a promotion focus. It's a sort of more optimistic mindset, if you wish. And other than that, just stay flexible and try to adapt to new circumstances as best as you can. But keep in mind, there's only so much you can do, right? We can't control external events in the world. So we just have to adjust and do whatever we can to stay sane ourselves in the first place. And finally, on sort of biggest challenges that I've had in my journey is, I would recommend not to put all your eggs in one basket. So to diversify your bets. And by that, I mean the bets you take as part of your career. So for example, it's a known fact that 90% of startups fail, right? Let it sink in. 9 out of 10 companies that are started fail. Only 10% survive, and a much, much smaller percentage than that becomes extremely successful. So I would recommend to always explore alternative passions as well. You can do a couple things, you know, sequentially or at the same time. You know, I did my PhD and sort of started building Prolific during the PhD. I will say though that my PhD supervisor was very flexible. He didn't mind. He didn't have any problems with me doing that. So that was helpful, that my advisor was sort of supportive and he didn't judge the fact that I would do something different alongside my PhD. And it took me 5 instead of 3 years to finish the PhD, which in retrospect is actually totally okay. It's not a problem. University was very accommodating. And I think most universities are very accommodating. You can always find extra funding somehow. You just have to be creative, basically, or very frugal. So yeah, be smart with how you spend your money. And so for me, other than being passionate about startups and building a startup, it's also that I'm passionate about science and science communication. So I regularly think about what research projects I can pursue next. So that way, if one thing doesn't work out, if something implodes or just goes awry, I can always have a potential plan B or C. And that gives me also some psychological comfort and psychological safety, right? If this thing that I'm passionate about doesn't work, okay, at least I have this and that I can still explore and pursue. All right, keeping an eye on time. I'm going to try to keep it to another 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, so doing a PhD and starting a startup is hard. What would I tell my younger sibling if I had a younger sibling, which I don't? I would first start by saying that it's great to combine your passion and whatever opportunities present themselves to you. So when you're deciding what career move to make, ask yourself 2 questions. 1, what sparks your curiosity and brings joy to you personally? And 2, what problems really need to get solved? And what kinds of opportunities are there in the market if starting a startup is what you want to do, right? I wouldn't just go with the next best startup idea. I would carefully reflect, you know, what problem really needs a solution. And that's so important. Trust your instinct. Don't ruminate for too long. Once you feel like, oh, there's this one problem that I have in my day-to-day PhD work, and there's really no tool that solves this problem, why don't we build it ourselves? You know, it's possible. Here's a book that I really like for anyone who wants to start a startup. It's called the mom test. And it's basically, I think what I like about this particular book is that it helps you to figure out how to talk about your startup idea, how to figure out whether the idea you have is really worth pursuing. And it also helps you to snap out of confirmation bias, because many people who start a startup, many founders, are initially very excited and they think this idea is so important, especially in America. I noticed in the United States, everyone is so excited and so confident. But you also have to be self-critical, right? Of course, you think that everyone needs what you're building, but is that really true? And it's really important how you sort of reflect on this question and what questions you ask potential customers. So if startups is what you're interested in, definitely check out this book. And also I would recommend the essays by Paul Graham, who is one of the 4 founders of Y Combinator. This is probably the single most important resource that I've used over the past 8 years as we were building Prolific, is Paul Graham's essays. Definitely check that out. Okay, and there's some other resources here as well. I'll send you the slides afterwards. You can check it out in your own time. But so I'm going to move forward for now. Minimize future regret is, I think that's a really useful framework. So what would you really regret not trying or not doing when you're 80 years old? It's called the regret minimization framework. And it's quite simple. You know, in X years, will I regret not doing something? If you already know that you're going to regret not doing something, then just do it now. It's now or never. Why not? Why wait? If you have constraints, you know, if you cannot do it yet, okay, maybe make a plan on how you're going to get there. But if you're not going to regret it, then don't bother, right? If it's not that important to you, then maybe that's not the best use of your time. So my advice would always be just go for it. Just try it out, see what happens. If it's not a good idea, then I think you will learn pretty quickly. And there's some good resources here by Jeff Bezos. I know it's ethically questionable how, you know, Amazon treats their workers, but Jeff Bezos is a, you know, objectively very successful business leader, and there's lots of great material on the internet that you can check out. You know, I think he's the one who popularized this regret minimization framework. So check out those resources. Here's something that I firmly believe in, which is to give more than you take. So my advice would be give generously to other people, but at the same time, keep your own cup full. Don't sacrifice yourself for other people. As they like to say, you know, the currency of real networking is not greed, but generosity. And I very much agree with that. But, you know, I think many people are givers and many people like to give to other people and make positive contributions. But at the same time, it can lead to burnout. So be careful. Don't overgive yourself. There's a great book on this topic by Adam Grant from the University of Pennsylvania. And he basically talks about this topic. And he also finds that givers outperform takers in the long run. By takers, he means people who take and take, but don't really reciprocate much or give much back. And there's another great book here, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, that really, really helped me develop my own skills over the past couple of years. So I highly recommend that as well. A few points on how to start a startup. One mistake that I see a lot when I speak with founders is that they basically, especially when they're first-time founders, they invest a lot of time and money into marketing in the early days, where they don't actually have a strong enough product yet. So it's the wrong way around. You need to start with building the product, whatever it is, whether it's software or hardware, it doesn't matter. building the product first, making sure it's workable enough. And only when you have product market fit, should you then be more systematically going for marketing and sales and growth, right? You first need to make sure that the market needs the product, that there's product market fit, and then double down on marketing and sales. Otherwise, it's just you're wasting money. If the market doesn't need your product, why would you do a lot of marketing? Here's an essay I wrote after Y Combinator on this exact topic. So feel free to check it out if you would like to. Okay, I think I have a couple more points. I would definitely want to give time for questions. So here's something that I also firmly believe in. Be vulnerable with people you trust. So don't let problems eat you up from the inside. When you struggle, talk to people, right? Friends, family, and colleagues you trust. And I agree with Brené Brown. She's a really cool researcher in Texas who's doing a lot of research on social work. She talks about how vulnerability is the birthplace of joy, creativity, and connection. It's a little bit cheesy and it's very American in a way, but I think it's actually very true. And she has a fantastic TED Talk on this topic. I imagine many of you actually have already watched it, so you know what I'm talking about. And she has two really good books called Daring Greatly and Rising Strong that I definitely recommend on the topic of vulnerability. Okay, this should be a 6, never mind. So I think the 6th and final point is to be honest and authentic. That's maybe a controversial one, but that's the German in me. German people tend to be very direct and outspoken and honest. And I think it's really important to be honest and authentic and to allow yourself to make mistakes, to learn from them and move forward and shape your life the way you want it to be. I think the good part about being honest and authentic is that it will resonate with people who are honest and authentic themselves. So then you will naturally attract great people and build a great community around you. There's a caveat here. So being very honest and unfiltered can sometimes lead to conflict, or it can alienate some people, right? If you're honest about your political views, you might alienate people on the other side of the political spectrum, let's say. And it can make you quite controversial. And I'm aware that I might be perceived as a bit unfiltered and controversial, maybe sometimes on my social media. But you know what? That's just who I am. And I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. And nobody's perfect. So everyone is allowed to make mistakes and simply learn from them. Oh yeah, and in my humble opinion, it's better to be honest and authentic than deceitful, right? I'm sure many of you agree. I think that's my final slide. So what not to do? I would say do not force ideas or projects or career paths if they don't feel right. Don't force anything. Go for it if it feels exciting and if you're passionate, but don't force it. I would also recommend not to stay in toxic environments or with people who pull you down. Of course, we all have some responsibility, right? And everybody should play a part in solving problems and helping to fix issues. But at the same time, I know from personal experience that there are plenty of toxic environments, both in academia and in industry. It doesn't matter. And so sometimes to preserve your mental health, it's better to just exit the environment, I could tell a lot of stories on this, but I think now is not the time, or maybe a little bit later in the Q&A session. And one final point on copying things. It really surprises me, but there are a lot of copycats of prolific these days. In Europe and even in Asia, I've seen one at some point. And I don't really understand kind of this approach, why do other people copy sort of, and it's not just copying the idea, it's literally copying the website word for word. So I would advise against that. I think everyone is creative in their own unique way. So get your creative juices flowing. And I think everyone has potential and a spark in them. So I would advise against just copying other people's work. I mean, beyond the fact that it's ethically not a good thing, right? I mean, we all learn about integrity in our studies. It's just ethically not the right thing to do. And also, you know, just get creative yourself. I think that's just a much healthier approach and more exciting, right? Just to come up with your own ideas and kind of realize their potential in the real world. So that's all I had to say today. Every one of you is highly educated and everyone is full of potential. I think the world is your oyster. Yeah, and I hope what I talked about was useful to you. And you can reach out to me anytime. I'm quite available, you know, on Twitter and via email. So don't hesitate to reach out to me afterwards or anytime you want. And I'm happy to help in whatever way I can or connect you to people who might be helpful to you. Yeah, let me know. Thank you very much.